Part 3. Questions 21 to 35. In this part, you will hear 3 talks, lectures or conversations. The talks, lectures or conversations will not be repeated. There are 5 questions for each talk, lecture or conversation. For each question, choose the right answer. A, B, C or D. Questions 21 to 25 refer to the following conversation. First, take some time to read the questions 21 to 25.
As we learn more about the DNA in human cells and how it controls the growth and development of cells, then maybe we can explain a very important observation, that when we try to grow most human cells in a laboratory, they seem programmed to divide only a certain number of times before they die. Now, this differs with the type of cell. Some cells, like nerve cells, only divide 7 to 9 times in their total life. Others, like skin cells, will divide many, many more times. But finally the cells stop renewing themselves and they die. And in the cells of the human body itself, in the cells of every organ, of almost every type of tissue in the body, the same thing will happen eventually. Okay. You know that all of a person's genetic information is contained on very long pieces of DNA called chromosomes. 46 of them in a human cell. That's 23 pairs of these chromosomes of various lengths and sizes. Now, if you'll look at this rough drawing of one of them, one chromosome about to divide into 2, you'll see that it sort of looks like, well, actually it's much more complex than this, but it reminds us of a couple of springs linked together, 2 coiled up pieces of DNA. And if you stretch them out, you'll find they contain certain genes, certain sequences of DNA that help determine how the cells of the body will develop. When researchers looked really carefully at the DNA in chromosomes, though, they were amazed, we all were, to find that only a fraction of it, maybe 20 to 30%, converts into meaningful genetic information. It's incredible, at least it was to me, but if you took away all the DNA that codes for genes, you'd still have maybe 70% of the DNA left over. That's the so-called junk DNA, though the word junk is used sort of tongue-in-cheek. The assumption is that even if this DNA doesn't make up any of the genes, it must serve some other purpose. Anyway, if we examine the ends of these coils of DNA, we'll find a sequence of DNA at each end of every human chromosome called a telomere. Now, a telomere is a highly repetitious and genetically meaningless sequence of DNA, what we were calling junk DNA, but it does have an important purpose. It's sort of like the plastic tip on each end of a shoelace. It may not help you tie your shoe, but that little plastic tip keeps the rest of the shoelace, the shoestring, from unraveling into weak and useless threads. Well, the telomeres at the ends of chromosomes seem to do about the same thing, protect the genes, the genetically functional parts of the chromosome, from being damaged. Every time the chromosome divides, every time one cell divides into 2, pieces of the ends of the chromosome, the telomeres, get broken off. So after each division, the telomeres get shorter. And one of the things that may happen after a while is that pieces of the genes themselves get broken off of the chromosomes. So the chromosome is now losing important genetic information and is no longer functional. But as long as the telomeres are a certain length, they keep this from happening. So it seems that by looking at the length of the telomeres on specific chromosomes, we can actually predict pretty much how long certain cells can successfully go on dividing. Now, there are some cells that just seem to keep on dividing regardless, which may not always be a good thing if it gets out of control. But when we analyze these cells chemically, we find something very interesting, a chemical in them, an enzyme called telomerase. As bits of the telomere break off from the end of the chromosome, this chemical, this telomerase, can rebuild it, can help reassemble the protective DNA, the telomere, that the chromosome has lost. Someday we may be able to take any cell and keep it alive, functioning and reproducing itself essentially forever through the use of telomerase. And in the future, we may have virtually immortal nerve cells and immortal skin cells or whatever, because this chemical, telomerase, can keep the telomeres on the ends of the chromosomes from getting any shorter.
Now answer question 21. Now answer question 22. Now answer question 23. Now answer question 24. Now answer question 25. Questions 26 to 30 refer to the following professor's lecture. First, take some time to read the questions 26 to 30.
Okay, as we've talked about, a key aspect of running a successful business is knowing, getting a good sense of what the customer actually wants and how they perceive your product. So with that in mind, I want to describe a very simple method of researching customer preference, and it's becoming increasingly common. It's called MBWA, which stands for Managing by Wandering Around. Now, MBWA, that's not the most technical sounding name you've ever heard, but it describes the process pretty accurately. Here's how it works. Basically, the idea is that business owners or business managers just go out and actually talk to their customers and learn more about how well the business is serving their needs. And try to see what the customer experiences, because that's a great way to discover for yourself how your product is perceived, what its strengths and weaknesses are, how you can improve it, that sort of thing. You know Dalton's? They make soup and canned vegetables and such. Well, the head of the company had Dalton's top executives walk around supermarkets asking shoppers what they thought of Dalton's soups, and he used that data to make changes to the company's product. I mean, when Dalton's, of all companies, embraces something as radical as MBWA, it really shows you how popular the theory has become. Yes, Lisa?
But isn't it dangerous to base decisions on information from a small sample of people? Isn't large-scale market research safer, getting data on a lot of people?
That's a good question. And, well, I don't want to pretend that MBWA is some sort of replacement for other methods of customer research. Now, market research data definitely can give you a good idea of the big picture, but MBWA is really useful at kind of filling in the blanks, getting a good on-the-ground sense of how your products are used and how people need to respond to them. And yes, the numbers of opinions you get is small, so you do need to be careful. But good business managers will tell you that the biggest fear they have and one of the most frequent problems they come across is, well, becoming out of touch with what their customers really want and need. Surveys and market research, stuff like that, they can only tell you so much about what the customers actually want in their day-to-day lives. Managing by wandering around, on the other hand, well, that gets you in there and gives you a good sense of what customers need. So when used in combination, then, MBWA and market research, well, they're powerful tools. Oh, here's another example for you. Senior executives for a clothing manufacturer, it was Elkin Jeans, They went and worked in a store for a few days, selling Elkin's clothes. Now, that gave them a very different idea about their product. They saw how people responded to it. They could go up to customers in the store and ask them questions about it. Yes, Mike?
Well, I would think that a lot of customers would be bothered by, if I'm shopping, I don't know if I'd want some business representative coming up to me and asking me questions. It's like when I get phone calls at home from market researchers, I just hang up on them.
Well, it's certainly true that, no one likes getting calls at home from market researchers or people like that. But I'll tell you something. Most customers have the exact opposite reaction when it comes to MBWA. Now, don't ask me why, because I really have no idea. But the fact is that customers tend to respond really well to MBWA, which is the key reason for its success. In fact, the techniques of MBWA work so well, they've actually been extended to all kinds of different contexts, like politics, for instance. A few years back, the mayor of Baltimore, I think his name was Schaefer or something like that. Anyway, he decided that the best way to serve the people of his city, was to actually get out there in it and experience the things that they experienced. So he'd ride around the city and, in all parts of it. And he'd see all the potholes. He'd see how the trash was sometimes not picked up off the side of the street. And then he'd go back to his office and he'd write these memos. Now, they were memos to his staff about the problems he'd seen and how they needed to be fixed. That sort of thing. But the thing is, he got all this information just by going around and seeing the different Baltimore neighborhoods and talking to the people in them. Now, he called it smart politics. We'd call it MBWA, or just plain good customer.
Now answer question 26. Now answer question 27. Now answer question 28. Now answer question 29. Now answer question 30. Questions 31 to 35 refer to the following professor's lecture. First, Take some time to read the questions 31 to 35.
The word opera means work. Actually, it means works. It's the plural of the word opus from the Latin. And in Italian, it refers in general to works of art. Opera lyrica, or lyric opera, refers to what we think of as opera, the musical drama. Opera was commonplace in Italy for almost 1,000 years before it became commercial as a venture. And during those years, several things happened, primarily linguistic or thematic, and both involving secularization. Musical drama started in the churches. It was an educational tool. It was used primarily as a vehicle for teaching religion and was generally presented in Latin, the language of the Christian Church, which had considerable influence in Italy at that time. But the language of everyday life was evolving in Europe, and at a certain point in the Middle Ages, it was really only merchants, aristocrats, and clergy who could deal with Latin. The vast majority of the population used their own regional vernacular in all aspects of their lives. And so, in what is now Italy, operas quit being presented in Latin and started being presented in Italian. And once that happened, the themes of the opera presentations also started to change, and musical drama moved from the church to the plaza right outside the church. And the themes changed, and opera was no longer about teaching religion, as it was about satire, and about expressing the ideas of society or government without committing yourself to writing and risking imprisonment or persecution, or what have you. Opera, as we think of it, is, of course, a resurrected form. It is the melodious drama of ancient Greek theater. The term melodious drama being shortened eventually to melodrama, because operas frequently are melodramatic, not to say unrealistic. And the group that put the first operas together that we have, today even, it was a group of men that included Galileo's father, Vincenzo. And they met in Florence, he and a group of friends of the Count of Bardi, and they formed what is called the Camerata dei Bardi. And they took classical theater and reproduced it in the Renaissance time. This produced some of the operas that we have today. Now, what happened in the following centuries is very simple. Opera originated in Italy, but was not confined to Italy any more than Italians were. And so, as Italians migrated across Europe, they carried theater with them, and opera specifically because it was an Italian form. What happened is that the major divide in opera that endures today took place. The French said opera ought to reflect the rhythm and cadence of dramatic literature, bearing in mind that we're talking about the golden age in French literature. And so the music was secondary, if you will, to the dramatic cadence of language, to the way the rhythm of language was used to express feeling and used to add drama. And of course, as a result, instead of arias or solos, which would come to dominate Italian opera, The French relied on what the Italians called recitativo, or recitative in English. The lyrics were spoken, frequently to the accompaniment of a harpsichord. The French said, "You really can't talk about real people who lived in opera," and they relied on mythology to give them their characters and their plots. Mythology, the pastoral traditions, the novels of chivalry or the epics of chivalry out of the Middle Ages. The Italians said, "No, this is a great historical tool, and what better way to educate the public about Nero or Attila or any number of people than to put them into a play they can see and listen to." The English appropriated opera after the French. Opera came late to England because all theaters, public theaters, were closed, of course, during their Civil War. And it wasn't until the Restoration in 1660 that public theaters again opened and opera took off. The English made a major adjustment to opera and exported what they had done to opera back to Italy, so that you have this circle of musical influences. The Italians invented opera. The French adapted it. The English adopted it. The Italians took it back. It came to America late and was considered too elitist for the general public, but Broadway musicals fulfilled a similar function for a great long while. John J. Chapman wrote about opera, quote, "If an extraterrestrial being were to appear before us and say, 'What is your society like? What is this earth thing all about?' you could do worse than take that creature to an opera." End quote. Because opera does, after all, begin with a man and a woman and an
Now answer question 31. Now answer question 32. Now answer question 33. Now answer question 34.
Why does the professor say this?
The English made a major adjustment to opera and exported what they had done to opera back to Italy.
Now answer question 35.
What does the professor imply when he says this?
John J. Chapman wrote about opera, quote, "If an extraterrestrial being were to appear before us and say, 'What is your society like? What is this earth thing all about?' you could do worse than take that creature to an opera." End quote. Because opera does, after all, begin with a man and a woman and an emotion.
This is the end of the listening paper. Now, you have 5 minutes to transfer your answers to your answer sheet. This is the end of the listening test. Please put your pen down.